Hello, I'm Tony Dahlman from the Upper Midwest Regional Field Office, and I hope that everyone's having a good day today. I'll be presenting both the marketing and production contracts and the accounts receivable and deferred payments sections, along with the conservation practices sections. For the 2024 ARMS 3, there's an additional subsection of conservation practices right after the accounts received deferred payments section. You will see over the course of this presentation that these sections go hand in hand. It is important to note that this is for any commodities delivered in our current year. So why use contracts anyways? Well, farmers use contracts to manage income risks, obtain compensation for higher product quality, create specific outlets for products, and provide assurance that they can make payments on their debts. Alternatively, processors use contracts to maintain timely flows of products and greater control over the characteristics and consistency of the products they acquire. But the bigger question is, what's the difference between a marketing and production contract? Instead of focusing on the words contractor and contractee, I'd say the clue lies in who owns the commodity and thus bears more risk in the contract. In a marketing contract, the farmer you're interviewing owns the commodity, and the contract concludes with the farmer selling the commodity to the contractor. The price in this case is decided upfront and reflected in the terms of the contract. In this case, the farmer or contractee will bear more risk. Price can change in the cash market, but the contract price is locked. In a production contract, the farmer being interviewed does not own the commodity, but instead provides a service to raise livestock or grow a particular commodity. Payment is a fee for this service. Since the farmer isn't buying or selling the commodity themselves, the price for a production contract can be much less than what the whole commodity is worth. The farmer takes less risk in this scenario since the animals or crops are not owned by them, making the contractor more responsible. For the sake of making it a bit easier or straightforward, here are a few examples of the types of commodities usually put on contracts. For the most part, marketing contracts tend to be for crops, but that is not always the case. In addition to row crops, fruits, and vegetables, milk is commonly put on marketing contracts as well, whereas livestock, such as hogs and chickens, tend to be put on production contracts. To belong in the marketing and production contract section, the contract must have been delivered in the reference year. In most cases, delivered means physically removed from the operation, but delivered also includes when partial payment was received, even if the contractor has not yet taken delivery. For marketing contracts, if the commodity hasn't been delivered yet by the end of the year, then it should be excluded from here in the marketing and production contracts section and instead recorded under farm assets in that section of the questionnaire. For production contracts where the commodity is still being serviced at the end of the year, exclude it from marketing and production contracts. Be sure to record the value of inputs used in the assets section. However, for production contracts, the commodities themselves never belong under item 3A, B, and C. Think back to previous sections where the cash sales column said for any year's production. It's the same case here. The operator could have a marketing contract for a previous year's commodity. If it was delivered in our reference year, then it belongs in the marketing and production contracts. And you should also record beginning of year asset value and farm assets for that commodity. So you've determined the contract was delivered in our reference year. First, write a description for what the commodity is in column 1. Be specific. Do not just write in hogs or chickens. Instead, use finishing hogs, laying chicken pullets, dairy heifers, etc. Then refer to your respondent booklet to look up the code corresponding with that commodity. Put that code in column 2. If you're entering this in CAPI, the Commodity codes are automatically associated by using the drop-down menu. But be aware, the CAPI drop-down menu is in alphabetical order. However, all livestock and livestock products are grouped below all of the crops. So in order to find broilers or milk in CAPI, you would need to scroll down past all the crops, past winter wheat in the W's, before you see livestock or dairy products. If you don't see what you're looking for, you may need to keep scrolling. The type of contract is indicated in column 3. In the past, the two contract types were in separate charts. For our more experienced enumerators, it may be easy to skip this, but it is vital to the accuracy of this section. As mentioned earlier, most milk and crop sale contracts are marketing contracts, whereas most hog, poultry, and fed cattle contracts are production contracts. There can always be exceptions and special cases, so focus on whether the producer is selling something they own, a marketing contract, or if they are paid or grow to raise something that they don't own, a production contract. In columns 4 and 5, we want to record the quantity delivered through the contract. Unit codes for column 5 are located below the table to correspond with the quantity delivered. Of course, we want to avoid duplicating contract sales and cash sales. However, the quantity delivered under the contract should agree with the quantity sold or removed in the sections that ask for crop and livestock acreage and sales information. Quantity is reported in both places, but dollars are not. If these were both cash sales and contract sales, review and comment if necessary. Please avoid duplication of sales. We know that all commodities in this table must have been delivered in our reference year, but it's still possible that the producer has not been paid by the end of last year. That's why column 6 states final price or fee received. This is what was negotiated as their price for marketing contracts or the fee for service in a production contract. The production contract fee should only represent the fee for their services. Operators who have production contracts, such as a poultry operation or a cattle feedlot operation, have a tendency to overstate their fees. They often include things like feed and vet expenses, which they may pay for but later bill to the contractor. We need to exclude money received from contractors as reimbursement for expenses. These contractor expenses are accounted for separately. Finally, we've reached column 7, and you may ask, is it important or even necessary? In truth, actually, yes. The total will be equal to the quantity times price sometimes, but it can be different as well. Column 7 can be less than the quantity times price, but not more. Depending on the commodity, it's not uncommon for the producer to not have been fully paid for the commodities delivered under these contracts yet. In these scenarios, column 7 would be less than quantity times price. When this is the case, the amount owed to the operation should be recorded with the accounts receivable portion of the questionnaire. Milk sales is a common example. Regardless of the lulls in a market, cows still need to be milked daily. Farmers use marketing contracts to manage risk and secure finances. Milk is transported off the farm frequently, even as often as daily during certain times of the year. However, payments come less frequently and tend to be bi-weekly. Thus, at the end of the year, some quantity of milk was delivered in the reference year under the contract that payment has not yet been received. This amount owed would be placed in the accounts receivable section that I will be showing you in just a minute. Occasionally, we see a value in column 7 which is greater than the quantity times price, with a comment that they were paid in our reference year for what was owed on a previous year's contract. This is incorrect. As I said, only contracts which were delivered in our reference year belong in this table. If money was owed for a previous year's contract, then it belongs in the accounts receivable section. Here's a quick example of how to correctly fill out the marketing and production contracts chart. In the above example, the farmer raised 160,000 broilers at 28 cents per head or per bird. He received $44,800 total. Note, when filling out the chart, make sure that within each line, the units are consistent between quantity and price. For instance, in the above example, if the units were per pound, then even if the total is the correct math, it is still incorrect. It misrepresents the contract because the producer now appears to be selling 160,000 pounds of broilers, but that price is not by pounds, which would be a much lower price. In this case, you should go to the livestock section to check the inventory, then update the units. Remember, the quantity, units, and price must agree, and they must make sense together. To further show the importance of having correct units, let's look at one more. The next example shows chickens reported on contract by pound. However, the price is reported by bird. Doing some quick math, we can divide the total, $44,800, by the price, 28 cents, and get an estimate of the quantity delivered. This would give you 160,000 pounds. Upon review of the livestock section, the farmer reported 160,000 birds sold. Using this simple calculation, we can conclude that the quantity needs to be updated to reflect our finding. We would then change the quantity from 640,000 to 160,000. But that's not all. Don't forget to update the unit code as well. If this was truly a per pound case, then a per pound price would be 7 cents. As we wrap up the section, the things to remember are the units, quantity, and price must agree, and the total can be less than the quantity times price, but never more. Let's move on to the accounts receivable section, where we record deferred payments across calendar years. There's a common misconception that you should put unsold crops here, but that's incorrect. Unsold and money owed are different things and thus should not be duplicated. Here's the difference. Unsold commodities are still on hand, so no money is owed for them. Do not record them in accounts receivable. Instead, record the value of unsold commodities as an operation asset. On the other hand, accounts receivable is where you record money still owed for commodities that have already been delivered but not yet paid. Think about the contracts we reviewed earlier. Regardless of if it's the inventory carryover or the deferred payments, either could be from the previous year or going into the next. The key distinction is when was the commodity sold or delivered. Earlier, I described how a dairy marketing contract can have money owed to them. Remember, dairies typically deliver milk daily or every few days, but only get paid for it every few weeks. In this section, we account for those deferred payments at the beginning and end of the year for commodities delivered in the prior year. Here's how that should look. The producer delivered 1,000 hundredweight of milk at $15 per hundredweight in late December last year and was paid in the first week of January. So he was owed $15,000 on January 1st for milk already sold or delivered. Record that in item 1A. Next, out of the $15,000 he was owed at the beginning of the year, how much was paid back to him during the year? In this case, the whole $15,000. So record $15,000 in the subset question. At the end of our reference year, he delivered 1,000 hundredweight of milk at $17 per hundredweight and was paid in the first week of the new year. So he was owed $17,000 on December 31st for milk sold during our reference year. Record $17,000 in 1B, the end of the year. Let's tie this back to the marketing and production contracts section. In marketing and production contracts with some quick math. As we stated earlier, dairy farmers are usually in a position where they are owed money on a contract. If a dairy producer sold 52,000 hundredweight of milk in the reference year at $17 per hundredweight, the total sale under that contract is $884,000. But since he hadn't been paid yet for the final week of deliveries, the amount received during our reference year is $17,000 less than that. This value would be reflected in a later section. Lastly, why don't you add $15,000 to the amount received in column 7, which was owed to him at the beginning of the year? Well, that's because the contract section excludes anything sold or delivered outside of our reference year. See the example above regarding processed cherries. For those with less familiarity with dairy contracts, let's try another common example with fruit producers, especially fruit sold for processing. Oftentimes, the grower might receive only a small payment for fruit delivered during the production year, generally about half of the contracted price. The other half of the payments are received after the crop has been marketed by the processor, generally late into the next year. Maybe you can think of examples of crops in your area where payments are typically deferred across calendar years. Remember to place money owed to the operation in the correct section. We will now discuss briefly about conservation practices that was added to this year's Section F. We would like to discuss a little bit about tillage and cover crop practices. This simply asks for the number of acres in which these particular tillage and cover crop practices were being used, such as no-till, reduced tillage, conventional tillage, rotation with tillage, cover crops harvested for forage or grazed. Please refer to the interviewer's manual for more specific definitions of each term. Regarding nutrient management and other practices, the operator or respondent would record the number of acres that receive manure, other types of fertilizer applied, or controlled drainage. There's a quick example on the next slides. Kurtz and Ann run an operation that comprises of 3,000 acres of cropland. Tillage practices and nutrient management vary depending on the crop that they grew on the 3,000 acres. 500 acres of lettuce used continuous conventional tillage the past 5 years. 500 acres of tomatoes used strip till practices. 1,000 acres of peaches were in continuous no-till the past 5 years. 500 acres of fresh strawberries and 500 acres of nectarines were all primarily no-till the past 5 years. All 3,000 acres received manure. The operation did not practice alley cropping nor use any feed additives. How do we fill this out? Kurtz and Ann grow on an operation that comprises 3,000 acres of cropland. However, tillage practices and nutrient management would vary depending upon the crop that they grew on the 3,000 acres. 500 acres of lettuce used continuous tillage the past 5 years. 500 acres of tomatoes used strip till practices. 1,000 acres of peaches were in continuous no-till the past 5 years. 500 acres of fresh strawberries and 500 acres of nectarines were all primarily no-till the past 5 years. All 3,000 acres received manure. The operation did not practice alley cropping, nor did they use any feed additives.
Another knowledge check. When Farmer Casey sold those 80 calves, each weighed 500 pounds, they were sold under a marketing contract for $270 per hundredweight, and Farmer Casey was paid in full. How would you complete columns 2 and 7 in this table? Would you A, skip column 2, that is, and then 80,000, B, skip column 2 and 108,000, C, enter 993 and 80,000, or D, enter 993 and 108,000. As you can see, the table has been partially completed. Please recognize that 40,000 pounds was converted to 400 hundredweight as the payment was $270 per hundredweight. Feel free to pause the video until you come up with the answer. Okay, let's take a look at the answer. Column 2 is for the commodity code. The office use only can be a little confusing, but this should be completed by enumerators. Please keep in mind that this survey is mailed to respondents, and having office use only cues the respondent that they do not need to complete it. Column 7 is simply 400 multiplied by $270, which is $108,000. Thus, the answer is D, 993, which is the commodity code for cattle, and $108,000.
Marketing and production contracts and accounts receivable, along with conservation practices, each tell an important part of the farm financial story, showing how producers manage risk and how they market their crops and livestock, and how deferred payments can affect year-to-year farm income. Thank you for watching.